Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. So in today's video, I'm going to set up my bullet journal for the month of November. And as always, I'm using my journal by Art and Olive, and you can use my affiliate code ARTandBoojos to get 10% off, which also helps to support my channel. First, I'm going to show you a flip through of all my spreads from October, and I'm also featuring you guys' recreations on the side. And if you do end up recreating any of my themes or spreads, definitely tag me on Instagram at ArtandBoojos. I always love seeing them and interacting with you guys. I mentioned in my last video that I was planning to do another Q&A video to celebrate reaching 10k subscribers on my channel, so if you have any other questions you can leave them down below. For this month I wanted to do a kind of magical potion theme, so I chose a very dark purple, a lighter, more warm-toned violet, a very light grey, and then this golden yellow that I also used for September and October. I also wanted to use a white gel pen and my usual Muji gel pen for all the doodles and titles, and I also ended up using some black paper later on. And just as a heads up, I don't know why, but things just didn't go my way this month, and I had to redo a bunch of stuff and cover things up, but I did try to cut most of it out so that it's not too repetitive. First, I'm making my little work planner, and if you've seen my last couple videos, this layout has pretty much stayed the same because I find it really useful. And for anyone new to my channel, I make a color code for like all types of work that I do. So for example, my YouTube channel and university. And then I just use this small calendar to kind of plan out and track when I have to work on each of them. And I just like having it as an overview of the whole month as well. So as you saw, I used the yellow as a background for the weekdays on the top, and I ended up not liking the look of it, so I covered it with black paper instead, which you'll see later on. And I did this at the very end, so I had already done pretty much the whole setup using the yellow for the titles, and I just covered it all up again, but I'm really glad I did because I think it just looks so much better. Everything else stayed the same though, so I used that really dark purple for all of my borders and the lighter purple for the dates. And as you can see, each day has 4 empty spaces, and that's where I track my work, so there's 1 space for each one. On the left, I wanted to decorate the calendar, so I drew a small potion bottle, and I also drew some planned doodles above and below it, but my camera shut off in the middle of it, so I didn't end up recording it. But you can see it here, and I drew a bunch more of those plans later on. Below the calendar, I'm adding the color code, and I just used my 4 colors, and again, I just like having it as an overview and planning out my work that way. Underneath, I always like to make a little YouTube and Instagram growth tracker, and again, that yellow will be covered up in a bit, but I just made 2 small sections where I can write down how many subscribers I have at the beginning and then at the end of the month. Here I'm just decorating the empty spaces with little stars and a moon, and I always make sure that I have these really small elements when I come up with a theme, and most of the time it's kind of like little stars or sparkles and dots, and they just make a spread look a lot more full and finished. Then I'm just also crossing out the last few days of October and the first few of December in my work planner. Now, like I mentioned, here is where I decided to cover up the yellow titles, and I actually filmed this the next day, so I hope the lighting isn't too different. I thought the yellow didn't look too bad on this page, but I just didn't like it overall, so I wanted to keep things consistent, and I just changed it everywhere. I also felt like the black suited the theme a lot better because I wanted it to be kind of magical and witchy, and I love the way it turned out at the end, so just a reminder that if you don't like something in your journal, you can always change it until you're happy with the result. I also made the stars a bit bigger because the fine liner was a bit too thin, and then I also added some dots with the dark purple, which really pulled everything together in the end. Like I said, nothing really seemed to go my way with this one, and I ended up redoing the whole cover page. So I had a bit of leftover paper from an old bullet journal, and I cut it to a very specific size so that I could hide the edges of the paper with a border later, because as you can see it's very obvious since the paper is so thick, but it actually worked out super well. I wanted to draw a big potion bottle with planned doodles on the side, and I used the yellow for the cork on the top, and then my Muji gel pen for the outlines, and the dark purple for the liquid inside. I feel like that purple is kind of like the perfect shade for this theme, because I wanted something super dark but not quite black, so that I could draw some stars and a moon in white, and it shows up super well on top of this marker. I wanted to make sure the marker is completely dry, so I'm first drawing those plant doodles on the side, and I basically did 2 different types or styles to give it a bit of variation. So one of them just has some leaves and a little berries, and the other one kind of looks like lavender, and they're both pretty easy to draw, so I thought they would be a good fit for this theme. I tried to make them look pretty balanced on both sides, but I also added some smaller doodles in between and a bunch of little details later on that made everything look a lot more centered. Here's where I'm adding those smaller plant doodles to also fill in a few empty spots in between the bigger ones. Next, I'm using my white gel pen to make it look like the potion is kind of swishing around inside the bottle, and I also drew a moon and a bunch of little stars inside because I thought that made it look more magical and cute. Then I'm coloring in the plant doodles, and I alternated between the yellow and the light purple because I really wanted to incorporate the whole color palette on the cover page. I actually took a picture of it at this point and tried out some color combos on my iPad because I wasn't too sure what would look best, so that's definitely something I will do in the future because it's much easier to just play around with the colors a bit that way. For the smaller doodles, I decided to use the darker purple because I wanted to add a bit more contrast, and I think it ended up looking super pretty. Here I wanted to fill out this space because I thought it looked a little bit off balance, so I just added another small branch, and then I drew a bunch of sparkles all around with a yellow shade. Now what I think actually tied it all together in the end was that I added these little dots everywhere to fill out the space a bit more. For the title, I used some black paper as a background, and then I wrote November in white. Here I'm placing it underneath the illustration, and then I added that border with the dark purple all around so that it conceals the extra paper that I used to cover up my previous attempt, and this way you really can tell that I covered anything up in the first place, so that worked out perfectly. And that's those 2 first pages finished, so let's move on to my habit trackers. Again, I only changed my mind about the titles pretty much at the very end of filming, so please ignore the yellow for the title here, and also for the habits because I covered those with black paper later on as well. What I did keep is this little potion bottle next to the title with some more plants on either side, and I did this the same exact way as on the cover page, so I drew all of the outlines first and then colored them in later. With that gel pen I'm using, you do have to be a bit more careful because it can smudge pretty easily if you use a marker on top of it, so I just made sure to stay inside the lines. If you're new to my channel, the way I like to make my habit trackers is I split them up into daily and weekly habits, and then for my dailies I make mini calendars for each one without actually writing the dates, so I just kind of outline it, and then I draw a circle for each day that I did each habit. So here the first row is for the title of the habit, then underneath I write the weekdays, and then I just make a rectangle and cross out the days from October and December. This time I did 6 habits and I left some space in the middle so that I can incorporate a doodle in between them, which is something I always like to do because it kind of breaks up the more structured part of the spread. Like I mentioned, here I'm using the fine liner tip of the yellow marker to cross out the days from October and December. Then for this middle section, I just wanted to draw another potion bottle and some plant doodles, and I tried to make sure the bottle is kind of tilted in different directions so that it doesn't look too boring. Next, I'm doing my weekly habits, and I always just write down a few things, so I like to keep them super simple. But again, I ended up covering up the yellow with black paper, which you'll see in just a bit. To track my weekly habits, I like to draw a circle for each week that I can fill in once I complete it. I felt like the whole spread was lacking a bit of structure, so I added a little border on the top to separate the daily habits from the title, and then also on the bottom to separate it from the weekly habits. And here is where I finally covered up all of that yellow. I think it was just a bit too dark as a background, and it also looked really messy, so I thought the best thing to do would be to just use some black paper instead, and I think it fits the theme a lot better too. As you can see, I also added the darker dots and made the stars a bit more prominent, because there was just a bit too much white space before, which made the doodles look too unbalanced. Again, I wrote the title in white on the black paper, and I feel like that contrast stood out so much better than the thin black lettering on the yellow background. But anyway, my daily habits for this month are doing my morning routine, planning my day in my bullet journal, practicing my art skills, doing a 5-minute stretch, working out, which I haven't done in a while, and then lastly doing my nighttime routine to wind down. Same process for the weekly habits, and here I randomly decided that I also wanted to change the parts where I wrote with that light purple, so I'm sorry this video is a bit all over the place, but it does get better after this page. Again, I felt like the purple was a bit too light, so instead I used it as a background and then wrote on top of it in black. For my weekly habits, I pretty much always track the same ones, so I wrote down making my weekly spreads in my bullet journal, watering my plants, doing a master study, so basically studying from an artist I really like, and then lastly cleaning my room. Here I'm going over the illustration in the middle and adding the darker dots to fill in any awkward spaces, and then I also made a border with the same color because again I felt like the spread needed a bit more structure. Moving on to the next page, I wanted to include my Instagram planner again that I've been using for the last couple of months because it's been working great and it helps me to plan out my Instagram posts and to stay on track with posting in general. This time I added my color code on the top because there was a bit of space underneath the title, and again for anyone new I like to track my progress for my posts, so I make a color code for when I made a spread, when I took pictures, when I edited them, and then for when I posted them on Instagram so that I can see what I still need to do and what is already finished. Underneath I'm making a section that is 10 spaces tall because I always try to make 9 posts throughout the month, and then I also include the cover page of the next month in the list. I used that very light gray to color in every second line, which is something I like to do because it kind of makes the sections look less empty. And then I made a border all around and I split it up into 3 sections. The first one is where I write down what I'm posting, so for example my first weekly spread. Next to that I write down the weekday and date of when I want to post it, and then all the way on the right I make my color code, so I draw 4 circles in the colors that I defined on the top, and then I can fill them out when each step is completed. Below this section, I wanted to have a space to write down my assignments for university because I don't currently have a designated space for it, and sometimes I kind of lose track of things I need to do for each class. So I decided to just make a simple list, and I'm making another section where I can write down the actual assignment, when it's due, and then a space where I can tick it off once I complete it. I'll have to see if the space is actually enough, but for now it's a bit of an experiment, so we'll see how it works out. I made the border with the dark purple again, and I split it up into 4 sections. The first one is for the class, the second for the assignment, the third for the date, and then the last one is where I can tick it off like I mentioned before. And then for the last time I covered up the titles with black paper and wrote them in white instead, and I also went over the doodles next to the titles a bit to make them fit in with the rest of the setup. So that's it for these 2 pages, and let's move on to my first weekly spread of November. I accidentally had my camera set to autofocus at first, so sorry about that, but I just made a mini calendar on the very top left of the spread. To fill in the empty space around it, I wrote week 1 next to it on the right, and I also added a moon and some plant doodles and sparkles underneath. For the layout, I basically split both pages into square sections that are 11 spaces wide and 11 spaces tall, with 2 in between them horizontally and then 1 in between them vertically. I really hope that makes sense. And then I placed Monday through Wednesday on the left page on the top, leaving space on the bottom, and then Thursday through Sunday on the right page, leaving space on the top to balance out the layout. I used black paper for the titles and the dark purple for the borders again to keep things consistent, and then of course I wrote the weekdays and dates in white. I attempted to color in every second line with that super light gray again, but I think it might be running out of ink, so you can't see it very well on camera. On the bottom left section, I just drew another potion bottle with plant doodles, and this time I drew a round bottle to switch things up a little bit. I was considering if I needed any other sections, but I didn't feel like that was necessary for this week, so I just went for illustrations instead. But of course, if you want to recreate the spread, you can definitely adapt it to your lifestyle and add other sections or just make the daily sections a bit bigger. A little while back I actually made a kind of like a layout guide on my iPad with the types of layouts I tend to use a lot for my weekly spreads, and I wrote down all of the spacing and sizes so that I don't always have to count them out every time, and I can just kind of switch between them, which saves me a lot of time. If you have a look at my weekly spreads that I post on Instagram, you can see that I don't use that many different layouts, but just placing the doodles in different spots and in general adapting them to each theme still makes them seem interesting and unique, which is why I have a lot of fun creating them each month. This part was after I started changing the other spreads, so I went back over some little spots like the mini calendar to make it fit in with the other pages. Now, as you can see, I did the same thing as on the cover page for this section on the right page because the quote didn't turn out the way I wanted. So again, this was my second attempt, but I wrote "Trust the magic of new beginnings" and I used the light purple as a background. Then I drew a little moon on the top, and I also decorated these sides with some plant doodles, and I actually wanted them to be a bit more symmetric this time, so I started on the right side and then I tried to kind of mirror it to the left. Of course, I'm adding a bunch of sparkles, and I also drew these little swirls below the quote because I didn't really know what else to put there. Then I added a bunch of dots all around, and I also colored in the plant doodles. Lastly, I made another border to hide the edges of the paper that I used to cover up my first attempt, and I think this quote section turned out so pretty, it might actually be my favorite part of this whole setup. But yeah, that is my weekly spread all finished, so let's go ahead and do a little flip through. Again, I'm sorry this video was a bit all over the place, but I'm so glad I changed my mind because I think it just looks so much better this way, and it also makes me really happy to look at it now, so I really hope you like it as well. I also quickly wanted to mention I made some stickers for this theme, which will be a new listing on my Etsy shop soon, so I'll leave a link to it in the description if you're interested. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, definitely leave any questions for me down below if you want me to make another Q&A video. Don't forget to tag me on Instagram if you end up recreating any of my spreads, and also let me know if you have any theme suggestions and which page was your favorite from this setup. I think for me it's probably the weekly spread. But yeah, that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope I'll see you again next time. Bye!